Have you ever walked away from something only to realize later that you were standing inches from the finish line? Maybe you stopped practicing a skill the week before everything would have finally clicked. Maybe you shut down a business right before momentum was about to build. Maybe you abandoned a dream in a moment of exhaustion, never knowing that success was already reaching for you. If you've ever replayed a decision in your mind and whispered, "What if I had held on just a little longer?" If you've ever felt the sting of quitting too early, then this story may permanently change the way you look at failure. Because this is the story of a man who dug and dug for water and surrendered just 4 inches before striking the largest underground spring in the entire region. 4 inches. He never knew. And the tragedy is not just that he failed, it's that he was closer than he ever imagined. This is his story. And perhaps, in ways you don't expect, it's yours too. Stay with me. In a remote farming village where the sky had withheld rain for 3 merciless years, there lived a man named Ethan. He was 35, strong in body, worn in spirit. His palms were thick with calluses from years of labor, yet no amount of effort could force crops to grow from dust. The earth had hardened into cracked stone. Fields that once shimmered green now lay brittle and gray under a punishing sun. Day after day, Ethan watched his livelihood fade. The corn stalks bent lifelessly. The soil crumbled through his fingers like ash. The livestock, once sturdy and proud, grew frail, their ribs visible beneath thinning hides. But the hardest part wasn't the failing farm. It was the questions. Every evening, his 2 young children would look up at him with dry lips and hopeful eyes. "Papa, when will the water come back?" And every evening, Ethan felt a weight in his chest heavier than any shovel he had ever lifted, because he didn't know. The village survived on a single well, one narrow source of water shared between 50 desperate families. Each morning before sunrise, people lined up in silence, clutching buckets and praying there would still be enough left when their turn came. Tension grew with every passing week. Hope thinned like the animals in the fields. So Ethan made a decision. If the village had only one well, he would dig another. Behind his house, beneath the blistering heat, he marked a spot and drove his shovel into the stubborn ground. The first strike echoed with determination, the second with urgency, the third with fear. He dug before dawn. He dug past sunset. He dug until his muscles trembled and his hands bled. Neighbors shook their heads. "You'll never find water there," they said. "The old well was dug generations ago. If there were water nearby, someone would have found it." But Ethan kept digging. Days turned into weeks. 10 feet, 15 feet, 20 feet. Nothing but dry earth and stone. His children watched from the doorway. His wife tried to hide her worry. The village began to whisper. By the fourth week, exhaustion had replaced hope. Ethan climbed out of the pit, stared into the hollow darkness he had carved into the earth, and felt something inside him collapse. Maybe they were right. Maybe there was nothing there. Maybe he had been foolish to believe he could change their fate. The next morning, he didn't pick up the shovel. The hole remained, a silent reminder of effort without reward. What Ethan never knew, what he would never discover, was that just 4 inches beneath where he had stopped lay a powerful underground spring, strong enough to supply not only his family but the entire village for decades. 4 inches. That was the distance between despair and abundance, between defeat and triumph, between giving up and breakthrough. And somewhere, in some part of your life, you may be standing exactly there, exhausted, discouraged, convinced that nothing is working. But what if you are only inches away? Most people don't fail because they lack talent. They fail because they stop too soon. They mistake silence for impossibility. They confuse delay with denial. Sometimes the breakthrough doesn't announce itself. Sometimes it hides just beneath the surface, waiting for one more strike, one more effort, one more day, one more try. The question is not whether success exists. The question is, will you keep digging long enough to reach it? The village well was still standing, but barely. Its water level had dropped so low that buckets scraped against mud before finding even a shallow pool. Families waited for hours beneath the burning sun just to carry home a single container. Arguments flared daily. Old friendships cracked under the pressure of thirst. People who once shared harvest meals now stood guard over every drop as if it were gold. Ethan could no longer endure the sight of his children licking dry lips, pretending they weren't thirsty. One evening, as the sky turned a bruised shade of red, he made a choice that would divide his life into before and after. "I'm digging our own well," he said quietly. Maria froze. Fear flickered across her face. "Ethan? Others have tried," she whispered. "They dug until they collapsed grass. The soil here is stone. The water runs too deep. Maybe we should leave. Maybe the city is our only chance." But Ethan's jaw tightened. "If I run now," he replied, "what will I teach them? That when life gets hard, we walk away? No. I would rather fail trying than teach my children to surrender." At dawn the next morning, while the village still slept, Ethan pressed his shovel into the earth near the edge of his land, a patch where the ground looked marginally less hostile. The first strike rang out like a declaration, metal against packed soil, a harsh, grating sound that would soon become the soundtrack of his existence. Dig, lift, toss, again. From behind curtains and half-closed doors, neighbors watched. Some pitied him, others smirked. "He's too proud to ask the elders," they murmured. "Bertram dug there 20 years ago, found nothing but rock. Let him learn the hard way." But Ethan heard none of it. 1 foot down, 2 feet, 3. Dust, stone, heat. His palms blistered within days. By the second week, the blisters tore open. Blood stained the wooden handle of his shovel. His shoulders throbbed constantly. Some mornings he woke unable to straighten his spine, and yet, every time exhaustion whispered stop, he heard another voice. "Papa, will there be water today?" So he kept digging. To measure progress, he tied a knot in the rope at ground level after each foot he descended. 1 knot, 3 knots, 7 knots, 10, each knot a promise, each knot a silent prayer. The hole deepened. The air inside grew cooler but no wetter. 20 feet down, the world above looked like a shrinking circle of light. The walls of packed earth towered around him like a prison he had carved himself. Climbing out now required gripping the rope, marked with 22 tight knots, hauling his aching body upward inch by inch. Still no water. Not even dampness. Just dry soil that seemed to mock his effort. By the second month, the whispers grew louder. "Ethan's lost his mind. He's burning strength he doesn't have. His farm is dying and he's playing minor." Even Maria began to watch him with silent worry. But Ethan continued, because sometimes pride pushes you forward. Sometimes love does. And sometimes it's the refusal to let the world be right about your failure. Down in that narrowing shaft, with dirt in his lungs and doubt pressing heavier than the earth above him, Ethan struck the ground again and again, unaware that he was racing not against the soil, but against his own breaking point. The criticism stopped being whispers. He should be looking for work in the next town. This hole won't feed his family. He's digging his own grave. Even his older brother came one afternoon, climbing carefully down the edge of the pit to face him. "Ethan," he said firmly, "this has gone on long enough. 2 months. If water were here, you would have struck it already. You're exhausting yourself chasing something that isn't there. Be practical. Let it go. Practical." The word lingered long after his brother left. At home, something else had changed. His children no longer asked about the well. They had stopped believing, and somehow that silence hurt more than their questions ever had. Late one night, after everyone was asleep, Ethan sat alone at the edge of the shaft. His legs dangled into the hollow darkness he had carved out of the earth. His body felt foreign to him now, swollen, trembling, barely responsive. His shoulders burned constantly. His knees throbbed. His hands were so torn and swollen that even lifting a cup of water made them shake. He stared down into the pit and whispered into the night, "What if they're right? What if I've been fighting for nothing?" For the first time, doubt didn't just knock, it moved in. The next morning, Ethan climbed down the rope with a decision already made. This would be the last day. "One more try," he muttered. "Just today. If nothing changes, I'll stop. I'll fill it in. I'll admit I was wrong." The sun was already punishing, even in the early hours. The air inside the hole felt thick, suffocating. Sweat rolled into his eyes, stinging. Every swing of the shovel sent pain shooting through his spine. 3 hours passed. Nothing. 6 hours. Still nothing. By midday, his movements were mechanical, empty, fueled only by stubbornness. Then his shovel struck something different. Not stone, not hollow, just an unusually dense layer of compacted earth. He drove the blade into it. It barely sank. He gritted his teeth and struck again and again and again. On the fourth blow, a sharp crack split the air. The wooden handle snapped clean down the center. Ethan froze. He looked at the broken tool in his blood-streaked hands, and in that instant, something inside him fractured too. All the weeks of effort, all the pain, all the hope he had forced himself to carry. Gone. He hurled the shattered shovel against the dirt wall. "Enough!" he roared, his voice ricocheting inside the narrow shaft. "I've given everything. I have nothing left." His shout bounced back at him, distorted, hollow. Then silence. No miracle. No water. Just his ragged breathing and the faint cry of a bird somewhere far above. Ethan sank to the ground. The earth felt cool against his overheated skin. He buried his face in his shaking hands, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to cry. Tears cut clean lines through the dust on his cheeks. "I'm done," he whispered hoarsely. "I can't do this anymore." Slowly, he lifted his head and looked up. High above him, the sky appeared as a small, distant circle of blue, almost unreal. Up there was the surface. Air. Relief. The end of this relentless battle. All he had to do was climb the rope. Walk away. Never return. No more digging. No more disappointment. No more humiliation. Just surrender. And as he stared at that shrinking circle of light, exhausted beyond words, Ethan faced the most dangerous moment of all. Not failure, but the choice to quit. Just as Ethan reached for the rope, ready to pull himself out of the pit and out of this chapter of humiliation, he heard something. Footsteps, slow, steady, unhurried. Then the dull thud of equipment being set down on the ground above. A shadow crossed the circle of sky. "Leaving already?" a voice called down. "Or finally admitting defeat?" Ethan squinted upward. An old man stood at the rim of the hole, outlined by the blazing sun. His clothes were faded and coated in road dust. A leather pack hung from his shoulders, heavy with tools. Coiled rope, iron hooks, and a reinforced shovel handle were strapped to his back. "Who are you?" Ethan asked, his voice hoarse. "Name's Ralph," the stranger replied calmly. "I dig wells. Been doing it longer than you've probably been alive." He shifted his weight and peered down into the shaft. "I was passing through when I heard about a stubborn farmer who refuses to quit. Figured I'd come see whether the stories were true." His eyes scanned the depth of the hole. He muttered. "Looks like I got here at the exact right moment." Ralph didn't descend. Instead, he lowered himself to sit at the edge, boots hanging over the drop, studying Ethan like a craftsman examining unfinished work. "Before you climb out," the old man called down, "send me up a sample of the soil from where your shovel broke." Ethan hesitated, confused, but something in the man's tone carried authority. He scraped up a chunk of the dense earth from the bottom sack, placed it in a bucket, and tugged the rope to send it upward. Ralph caught it easily. In the sunlight, he crumbled the soil between his fingers. He rubbed it slowly, thoughtfully. He lifted it to his nose and inhaled. Then, to Ethan's surprise, he pressed a small bit to his tongue. Several long seconds passed. Finally, he looked down. "What's your name, son?" "Ethan," he answered, his throat raw from shouting and dust. "Well, Ethan," Ralph said, holding up the dark clump of earth that "I've dug 47 wells across 3 provinces. I know soil like a baker knows flour." He squeezed the sample gently. "You're not digging through ordinary dirt anymore." Ethan blinked, too drained to react. "This," Ralph continued, "is blue clay." The words seemed to hang in the air. "It's the deepest layer in this valley. Hard as iron when you hit it. Most men think they've struck stone. They panic. They swing harder. They waste what little strength they have left." He let pieces of the clay fall through his fingers, and then they quit. Ralph leaned forward, his weathered face sharp with intensity. "But blue clay doesn't mean you're far from water." He tapped the earth. "It means you're almost there." Ethan's heart pounded weakly in his chest, though he barely dared to believe it. "Think about what you've been digging through," Ralph continued. "Dry dust, brittle soil, hot, lifeless ground. But this," he held up the clay again. "This feels different, doesn't it?" Ethan swallowed and nodded faintly. "It's cooler," Ralph said. "Heavier, dense, not wet yet, but holding moisture. That weight you feel, that resistance, it's pressure." He pointed downward into the darkness. "Water has been sitting beneath this layer for years, trapped, waiting." Ralph's eyes locked onto Ethan's. "Do you know what blue clay really means?" He paused just long enough for the silence to tighten. "It means you're less than a foot away from breakthrough." The words struck harder than any shovel. "You didn't fail," Ralph said firmly. "You reached the final barrier." He gestured toward the broken handle lying in the dirt. And you broke at the exact moment most men do. The old well digger's voice softened. The ground feels hardest right before it gives way. He studied Ethan carefully. So I'll ask you something important. Ralph leaned closer over the edge. Are you quitting because there's no water, or because you're exhausted from being so close? Ethan slowly shook his head, still trying to absorb what he had just heard. Ralph's voice grew firmer. This doesn't mean you're far from water, son. It means the opposite. You're not miles away, you're inches away. Beneath that blue clay is the aquifer, a buried river running through sand and stone. And from the feel of this soil, he held up the clay again, I'd say you're 4 inches from it. Maybe 6. 4 inches. Ethan's breath caught. You've been fighting the toughest layer in the entire well, Ralph continued. Blue clay is stubborn. When you attack it with force, it resists harder, and you were trying to smash through the final barrier when your body had nothing left. From his pack, Ralph pulled out a reinforced shovel, thick oak handle, iron head polished from years of use. He tied it securely to the rope and lowered it down. The tool descended slowly, turning in the shaft of light. Ethan caught it with trembling hands. It felt heavier than his old one, solid, balanced, unbreakable. I can't promise there's water exactly where you're standing, Ralph said carefully. I'm a digger, not a fortune teller. But I can promise you this. If you climb out now, you will never know. His eyes locked onto Ethan's, and not knowing will follow you for the rest of your life. The words landed deeper than any shovel strike. So here's what you're going to do. Ralph continued. No more wild swings, no more attacking the earth like it's your enemy. Blue clay hardens when you fight it. He pointed downward. Cut a narrow pilot hole right in the center, 6 inches wide, no wider. Let the blade do the work, slow strokes, controlled. You're not breaking it, you're persuading it. He let that sink in. Work with the clay, not against it. Ethan looked at the wall of dense blue earth, then at the shovel in his hands, then up at the old man's weathered, steady face. Inside him, something flickered. It wasn't hope. He was too drained for hope. It was something quieter. Maybe curiosity. Maybe defiance. Maybe just the simple thought. 1 more hour. I can survive 1 more hour. If nothing changes after 60 minutes, Ralph called down, I'll climb in and help you fill this hole myself. That's my word. He paused. But if you find water, promise me something. Ethan looked up. Promise me you'll never forget how close you were to quitting, and when you see someone else at their breaking point, you tell them this story. Ethan nodded faintly. Then he turned back to the clay. This time he didn't roar. He didn't swing wildly. He didn't try to conquer the earth. He placed the blade carefully against the center of the wall and pressed, slowly, steadily. 10 minutes passed. The clay resisted, dense and unyielding, but Ethan kept his movements precise. Each stroke carved only a sliver, no wasted energy, no desperation. 20 minutes, 30. Sweat dripped, but his breathing stayed controlled. 40 minutes, 50. Then the sound changed. The sharp scrape against clay softened into a muffled crunch, a different texture, a dampened resistance. Ethan froze. He drew the shovel back. The blade was coated, not in dust, but in dark, glistening mud. Mud. His pulse surged. Carefully, he widened the narrow pilot hole, just as instructed. Another stroke. More wet gravel. More slick clay. Still no dramatic eruption. No roaring fountain. Instead, something quieter happened. At the bottom of the small channel, moisture began to gather, not rushing, seeping slowly, almost cautiously. A small pool formed, cloudy at first. Then as the sediment settled, it cleared, revealing a shimmering surface that reflected the thin circle of sky above. Water. Cold. Silent, rising inch by inch. Ethan stood motionless, afraid that even breathing too hard might make it disappear. Above him, Ralph's voice came softly. Stop digging. Ethan looked up, eyes wide. You've pierced the seal, Ralph said. The pressure below will do the rest. The tiny pool continued to swell, pushing gently upward as if the earth itself were exhaling. Climb out, Ralph instructed. Go home, eat, sleep. He gave a small nod. By morning, the well will be filling itself. And for the first time in months, Ethan wasn't staring at dry earth. He was watching proof that he had been 4 inches away from a miracle. Ethan moved to lift the shovel again. Wait, Ralph called down sharply. Ethan froze. Trust me, the old digger said, his voice calm but firm. Water doesn't burst through like in the stories. It seeps, it filters through sand and gravel. If you keep digging now, you'll stir up the layers and cloud the flow. He leaned forward slightly. Let it rest tonight. Let the earth finish what you started. The aquifer knows how to rise. Don't interfere with it. Reluctantly, Ethan stepped back from the small pool forming at the bottom of the shaft. Every instinct told him to keep working, to force the miracle to happen faster. But for the first time in weeks, he chose patience over force. That night was endless. He lay awake listening to the wind brush against the dry fields. Every hour he stared into the darkness, his mind racing. Was it still there? Had it drained away? Had exhaustion made him imagine the whole thing? Before the first hint of dawn, Ethan was already walking back toward the well. The air was cool, the village still asleep. His pulse thundered in his ears as he reached the edge. He gripped the rope, the same rope marked with 22 tight knots, each one representing a foot of effort, a day of pain, a refusal to quit. Slowly, he leaned forward and looked down. He stopped breathing. Overnight, the earth had answered. Where there had once been emptiness, there was now water, rising nearly 6 feet deep. Clear, still, reflecting the pale morning sky like polished glass. It wasn't muddy. It wasn't shallow. It was alive. The aquifer had fed the well steadily through the night, filtering upward through sand and stone, filling the space he had carved with his own bleeding hands. Ethan lowered a bucket. When he pulled it back up, the water was so cold it sent a shock through his fingers. So clean he could see the wood grain at the bottom of the bucket through it. He poured it back into the well. Within minutes, the level returned almost to where it had been. Not a trickle, not temporary, strong, constant, reliable. Ethan dropped to his knees. He counted the knots again. 1, 2, 3, 22. 22 feet of digging. 10 weeks of relentless labor, and he had nearly surrendered with only 4 inches of blue clay left between him and abundance. 4 inches, the width of his palm. 1 careful hour away from a lifetime of water. By midday, word had spread. The entire village gathered around the well. Buckets lowered and rose in disbelief. Women laughed as they filled containers without waiting in line. Children splashed at the edges of a small stream that began flowing across Ethan's land. Old men who had lived through decades of drought wiped tears from their weathered faces. The village elder examined the well carefully, testing the flow. He stood, turned to the crowd, and declared, "This is the strongest source in the valley. It will not run dry." Relief broke over the people like rain. Amid the celebration, Ethan searched for Ralph. He found him standing at the edge of the crowd, quiet, observing. Ethan tried to push through to thank him, to say something worthy of what had just happened. But Ralph simply gave a small nod, no speech, no pride. He lifted his pack onto his shoulder and began walking down the dusty road, disappearing the same way he had arrived, as if his purpose had only ever been to remind one exhausted man how close he truly was. And now, my friend, here's the truth. Ethan's story is not just about a well. It's about you. Right now, you may be standing in your own pit, tired, doubting, surrounded by voices telling you it's pointless. Maybe you've been digging for months, maybe for years. Maybe you've hit your version of blue clay, the hardest layer, the part that feels impossible to break. And maybe you're 4 inches away, but too exhausted to see it. The ground always feels hardest right before it gives way. The silence always feels longest right before the breakthrough. The question isn't whether there's water beneath you. The question is, will you climb out or will you give yourself one more careful hour? Maybe your palms feel torn open. Maybe the people around you have already written the ending to your story, and it doesn't include success. Maybe you're so drained that lifting the shovel one more time feels impossible. And maybe, just maybe, you're 4 inches from water. Understand this. The instant you feel the strongest urge to quit is often the edge of transformation. Not every time, but often enough that walking away should scare you more than staying, because success has a cruel habit. It never announces how close you are. There's no warning light that flashes. Breakthrough ahead, no signpost that says just 60 more minutes, no whisper in your ear promising it will be worth it. Instead, what you feel is resistance. Thick, heavy, unmoving. And most people mistake that resistance for a dead end. But what if it's the final layer? What if the barrier exhausting you is not blocking your future, but protecting it? Remember this. First, intense resistance is not proof you should stop. It's often evidence that you've reached something real. Blue clay isn't a prison wall, it's a door. The colder, heavier the soil feels, the closer you are to pressure building underneath. Water doesn't push against empty space, it pushes against something that's about to give. Second, every person who succeeds has a private moment where quitting would have been easy and invisible. You don't see those scenes. They happen in silence, in loneliness, in doubt, in places where no one is clapping. Those are the moments that decide everything, not talent, not luck. The decision to continue when no one would blame you for stopping. Third, you don't need visible proof to keep going. You don't need to see the water. You only need to decide that living with the question, what if I had tried once more, would hurt more than failing after one final attempt. Because failure stings, but regret lingers. Failure fades with time. Regret echoes for years. So if you're standing in your own deep hole right now, exhausted, discouraged, doubting yourself, pause, breathe. Then ask yourself one honest question. Are you truly out of chances, or are you simply at the hardest 4 inches? If there is even a possibility that you're closer than you think, then don't swing wildly. Don't panic. Don't surrender to the noise. Dig carefully, dig steadily, dig one more hour. Let the earth decide after that. Because sometimes the difference between a dry pit and a flowing well is 4 inches of courage. So here's the challenge. Whatever you're on the verge of abandoning, that business that isn't profitable yet, that skill that still feels awkward, that dream that now feels embarrassing to say out loud, that relationship that needs one real conversation, that goal that's taking longer than you expected. Give it one more focused hour, not another year, not a vague promise of someday, not endless grinding out of fear, just one intentional, disciplined, fully present hour. One more deep work session, one more strategic adjustment, one more courageous conversation, one more day of showing up on purpose, one more attempt, but this time, smarter. And this part matters. Don't attack it wildly. Don't swing out of frustration like Ethan did when he was exhausted and desperate. Shift your method, refine your technique, slow down, be precise, be thoughtful, be deliberate. Work with the resistance instead of trying to overpower it. Because here's the truth most people discover too late. If you quit now, you will never know how close you were. And that question, what if I had given it one more real try, weighs more than failure ever could. Failure teaches, regret lingers. You are not failing, you are cutting through blue clay. You are not lost, you are facing the final, stubborn layer that filters out the half committed. You are not foolish for continuing when others walked away. You are standing exactly where every breakthrough story reaches its quiet turning point, the invisible hour no one applauds. Success and failure are rarely separated by talent. They are often separated by inches, by one more honest conversation, one more adjustment in strategy, one more uncomfortable attempt, one more hour of refusing to walk away. The real question isn't, am I gifted enough? Am I lucky enough? The real question is, am I willing to dig one more careful hour with a better approach? If this story reminded you why you started, if it lit even a small spark inside you, if it gave you strength for just one more push, share it with someone who's standing at the edge of their own pit. Tell them this, one more hour, the water might be closer than you think. And I want to know, what are you giving one more hour to? What dream are you refusing to bury? Let's remind each other that we're not alone in the digging. We're all fighting through something. We're all closer than it feels in the darkest moment. Until next time, remember this. Don't measure how deep you've gone. Measure how near you might be. Keep digging.